Some say the dead can't speak, but what if they never stop trying? A breath against your neck when you're alone, a name whispered from the dark that no one living should know, a door that creaks open even though it was locked. Behind every murder, every vanishing, every cold case gone silent, something waits. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't forget, and it doesn't always stay buried. These stories aren't folklore. They happened, and they still echo in blood-stained rooms, in abandoned woods, in the space just beyond the light. So close your eyes, and whatever you do, don't open the door. You're listening to Whispers After Dark, where the shadows talk and the night listens. In the shadowy prairies of post-Civil War Kansas, a patch of land known as the Osage Trail would become the setting of one of America's most chilling unsolved murder cases. This is the story of the Bloody Benders, Kansas's serial killer family. The story begins in Yuba County, where a family of German immigrants, John Bender Sr., his wife Elvira, also called Ma, their son John Jr., and daughter Kate, settled in a one-room cabin and opened a modest inn and grocery store for travelers. To neighbors, they were strange but polite. To passers-by, they were forgettable. But beneath the surface, the Benders were anything but ordinary. One by one, travelers who passed through the area began to vanish. These weren't people looking to disappear. Many had families, business appointments, or neighbors expecting their return. One such man was Dr. William York, a respected physician traveling from Fort Scott. When he didn't return home, his brothers, Colonel Ed York and Kansas State Senator Alexander York, launched a private investigation. Ed eventually arrived in Yuba County and questioned the Benders. Kate, the charismatic daughter known for holding seances and preaching spiritualism, told him that perhaps his brother had run off or fallen victim to bandits. But Ed had a feeling something was off. He left, unsettled, but with no proof. It wasn't until weeks later, when the Benders' cabin appeared abandoned, that townspeople dared to act. A search party entered the home, and what they found beneath the floorboards would leave the entire state in shock. Underneath a blood-stained trapdoor was a cellar soaked in dried gore. The smell was overpowering. In the nearby orchard, shallow graves were discovered. The first body was that of Dr. York, his skull crushed and throat slashed. As they kept digging, more corpses appeared, some whole, some dismembered, all brutalized. The Benders' method was horrifyingly methodical. A guest would be seated in the place of honor at the dining table, their back to a curtain that separated the room. Behind the curtain, one of the Benders would strike the victim with a sledgehammer. Once unconscious or dead, they would slit the throat and drop the body through the trapdoor into the cellar. Among the victims was George Newton Longcore, a widower traveling with his toddler daughter, Mary Ann. Both were found buried together. It appeared no one, not even children, was spared. In all, authorities uncovered at least 11 bodies, though some believed the true count was far higher. There were whispers that some guests were simply never found, their bones scattered or buried beyond the orchard. Despite a statewide manhunt, the Benders vanished. Some believed they split up. Kate and John Jr. headed south, Ma and Pa Bender to the east. There were sightings, rumors of vigilante justice, and even claims that some had been killed and buried by angry farmers. Yet no confirmed arrests were ever made. To this day, the Bloody Benders remain a terrifying enigma. Were they driven by greed, madness, or something darker, some cult-like lust for blood masked beneath spiritual mumbo-jumbo and family civility? Their cabin was dismantled. Nothing remains of the building now. Just open Kansas plains, and an eerie silence that settles over the land when the wind dies. Travelers who pass through still talk of a heaviness in the air, a sense that something is watching from the tall grass, and some believe the ghosts of the murdered never truly left. Some places don't just hold memories, they hold something darker. A silence too deep, a stillness that presses in like a warning. Not every house is just wood and nails, some breathe. Some remember. They remember the last screams that pierced their walls, the final breath of a child, and the heavy, dragging footsteps of someone who never left. And in a quiet town in Iowa, there's one such house where something unspeakable happened and never left. Our next story is about the Villisca Axe Murder House. In the small town of Villisca, Iowa, tucked between cornfields and the quiet drone of American farmland, stands a house frozen in time. Small, white, unassuming. But if you step inside, you might feel it, the weight of something wrong. It was June 10th, 1912. Josiah and Sarah Moore had taken their 4 children to church that Sunday evening. Joining them were 2 guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger, young sisters invited to stay the night. 8 souls under one roof. By morning, all were dead, bludgeoned in their beds with an axe. Their faces so destroyed not even loved ones could recognize them. Every mirror in the house was covered with cloth, every window veiled. The killer had taken their time, moved from room to room, slowly, methodically. One of the girls, Lena, was found lying across the bed, her nightgown pulled up, a defensive wound on her arm. Unlike the others, she may have awakened. She may have seen the shadow standing over her. The killer remained a phantom. Though Josiah's own axe was found in the guest room, caked in blood and hair, no fingerprints were ever matched. No stranger was seen fleeing town. No neighbor heard screams. And perhaps that was the most terrifying part, that 8 people could be slaughtered in their sleep, and the night stayed silent. Investigators found a bowl of bloody water in the kitchen, a plate of uneaten food. As if the murderer had lingered after the slaughter, cleaned up, and calmly sat down for a meal, then vanished into the night. Over time, suspects came and went. A traveling preacher confessed, a local man was arrested, tried, and acquitted. Rumors swirled of jealousy, secret affairs, and townsfolk who knew more than they let on. But the truth was buried with the Moors, and the house, it never forgot. Visitors today report cold spots that move with them, disembodied whispers in empty rooms, doors creak open when no one is near. And on some nights when the wind dies and the moon hangs low, the sound of children's footsteps echo in the upstairs hallway, even when the house is empty. Paranormal investigators have captured EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, crying out for help. Others have run from the house mid-investigation, claiming a shadow stood watching them from the attic, where the killer may have waited in silence for the family to fall asleep. One man, during an overnight stay, woke to find tiny handprints on his sleeping bag. There were no children in the house that night. And in 2014, a ghost tour guest stabbed himself in the chest in the very room where the Moors were killed. Later, when questioned, he said only 5 words, "The house told me to." No one knows who committed the Villisca Axe murders. No one ever will. But if you listen closely, the house might tell you. Because some homes, remember, have you ever heard of a place that was built for death? Something so evil that its presence still haunts the place it used to be? This is the story of the H. Holmes murder castle, a house that breathed death. And even though the walls have crumbled, the screams still echo. Welcome to the murder castle. In Chicago's Inglewood neighborhood, just beyond the glow of the 1893 World's Fair, there once stood a building unlike any other. It was designed to look like a hotel, but it wasn't. It was a trap. Built by a man named H. Holmes, it was meant to confuse, to disorient, and to kill. Staircases led to brick walls. Doors opened to nowhere. Some rooms were airtight chambers with hidden gas jets. Others had peepholes and chutes that dropped straight to the basement, where lime pits, surgical tables, and furnaces waited. It was called many things, a hotel, a boarding house, a pharmacy, but history would remember it as one thing, the murder castle. It rose on a quiet corner in Chicago's Inglewood neighborhood, just before the 1893 World's Fair. Thousands came to the city for adventure, for hope, for work, and for many this strange hotel was their last stop. You see, the castle was a maze, designed by Holmes himself, built by workers who were constantly fired and replaced so no one ever saw the full blueprint. Staircases that led to nowhere. Doors that opened to brick walls. A room with no windows and no exit. Trapdoors, peepholes, gas lines hidden in the walls. This was not a hotel. It was a labyrinth of death. Holmes advertised for young women seeking work. He charmed them, promised them jobs, lodging, safety. Some were last seen entering the building. None were seen leaving. Inside the castle, Holmes had rooms he called the Vault. Soundproof, airtight. He would watch from hidden panels as his victims screamed. Then, when the air ran out, he'd send their bodies down a secret chute to the basement, where a dissecting table and lime pits waited. Bones were sold to medical schools, teeth dumped in the furnace, flesh dissolved in acid. He turned murder into profit. It's unknown how many died in that place. Holmes confessed to 27. Some say the real number is over 200. He was finally caught in 1894, not for murder, but for insurance fraud. Only when police searched the hotel did the truth crawl out from the walls. Bloodstains, bones, a woman's shoe, a child's toy, the stench of death in the ventilation system. Holmes was hanged in 1896. It took over 15 minutes for him to die. He requested to be buried in a coffin encased in concrete, afraid someone would dig him up and do to him what he had done to so many others. But the castle, it lived on for a while. After Holmes was arrested and hanged, the building stood quiet, but neighbors said it was anything but silent. People reported strange cries coming from inside at night, long after it was boarded up. Footsteps were heard pacing, stopping, and then pounding against the floor. Some swore they saw flickering lights in the upstairs windows, though there was no electricity. Years later, when the structure was briefly reopened as a post office, employees refused to go into the basement. They said it felt wrong down there, like the walls were breathing, watching. A few claimed to hear banging from behind sealed doors. One janitor quit after saying he saw a woman's face in a wall, eyes wide, mouth open as if screaming. Then it was gone. One night, a watchman ran screaming into the street. He swore he saw a man with sunken eyes and a crooked smile walking through the halls. The place was eventually abandoned, then burned. Some say it was arson. Others say the building killed itself. Paranormal investigators who visited the site before its demolition described it as one of the darkest places in America. Not just metaphorically. They said the air itself was heavy, suffocating. EVPs captured voices pleading, whispering, some even saying, "Don't go down there." One photo taken near the old stairwell shows a blurred figure, a man in a bowler hat, standing just out of focus, but no one remembers anyone being there. In 1938, a fire consumed much of the building. The cause? Never determined. Some said it was vandals. Others believed the building wanted to be destroyed. Even now, those who visit the site where a new structure stands report cold spots, dizziness, and nightmares the same night. And some people claim they've seen a tall man walking the sidewalk late at night. Sharp features, hat tilted low, always watching, always smiling. Today, nothing of the original castle remains. Just the stories and the memory of a man who designed a building where death had keys to every door. Because maybe H.H. Holmes didn't just build a castle for murder. Maybe he built himself a throne. And maybe, just maybe, he's still there, waiting behind a door that never opens, in a hallway that no longer exists, where the dead still whisper and the walls will never forget. Because the murder castle may be gone, but what happened there never left. Some stories don't begin with a scream. They begin with a whisper. A creaking floorboard in the dead of night, a soft thud in the attic above your bed, a footprint where no one should be. Not every haunting needs a ghost, and not every monster leaves when the sun comes up. Sometimes they stay. It was March 31st, 1922, in rural Bavaria, Germany, on a lonely farmstead tucked between the villages of Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen. The place was called Hinterkaifeck. It wasn't a real village, just a nickname for a remote farm that sat deep in the woods, far from neighbors and even farther from help. The farm was home to Andreas Gruber, a harsh 63-year-old man, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Josef, and a maid named Maria Baumgartner, who had just arrived for her first day of work. She would not survive the night. 6 people lived on the Hinterkaifeck farm. By the next morning, every one of them was dead. But it wasn't just the murder that chilled Germany to the bone. It was everything that happened before. In the days leading up to the massacre, Andreas Gruber had noticed something strange. Footprints in the snow leading from the edge of the forest straight to the farmhouse, but no prints leading away. He searched the property, locked the doors, checked the barn. He found nothing. Then the sounds began. He told neighbors he heard footsteps in the attic at night, but when he searched, there was no one there. A newspaper appeared in the kitchen, one they didn't subscribe to. Keys went missing. Mysterious scratches showed up on the tool shed. The family began to feel watched. Still, Andreas never contacted the police, and maybe deep down, he knew there was no point. On March 31st, night fell. One by one, members of the family were lured into the barn. No one knows why. Maybe they heard something. Maybe they saw someone. Whatever it was, they went willingly. They were each murdered with a mattock, a tool similar to a pickaxe, struck in the head, their skulls crushed. No screams were heard. No one escaped. Then the killer moved inside. The maid, Maria Baumgartner, was killed in her room. 2-year-old Josef was murdered in his crib. 6 lives ended, not in a rage, not in haste, but methodically, quietly, as if someone had all the time in the world. And then, the most disturbing part of all, the killer stayed. Over the next 4 days, smoke was seen rising from the chimney. The cows were fed, the dog was tied up in the barn, someone had cooked meals in the kitchen. They slept there, ate there, lived there, inside the house of the people they had just slaughtered. Days passed before anyone checked on the family. When the mailman noticed their deliveries piling up and the children failed to appear at school, neighbors went to the farm to investigate. What they found in the barn stunned even seasoned investigators. The bodies of Andreas, his wife, Victoria, and 7-year-old Cecilia were stacked on top of each other, covered in hay. Inside the house, Maria and Josef were found where they'd been killed. Victoria's face was unrecognizable. Joseph's skull had been smashed, and little Cecilia, just 7 years old, had torn clumps of hair from her head before she died. It wasn't just a murder. It was something darker, something cruel. Police searched the property and found the murder weapon hidden in the attic, the very attic the family had heard footsteps in days before. And yet, despite dozens of interviews, investigations, and even a full reconstruction of the crime in 2007, no one has ever been arrested. No motive has ever been proven. The victims' heads were removed and sent to Munich for examination. But in a final twist, the skulls were lost, vanished before they could be buried. No one knows where they are. The Hinterkaifeck farmhouse was torn down the following year. All that remains is a memorial stone. The land itself has long been abandoned. The case remains unsolved. No footprints leading away, no suspects, no justice. Just 6 people, one silent attic, and a trail of horror that still haunts Germany to this day. They say evil always leaves a trace, but in Hinterkaifeck, it didn't leave a single one behind. They say true evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it wears a suit, carries a briefcase, and speaks with charm and intelligence. It walks among us, calm, well-mannered, even brilliant, until one day it reveals itself. Not out of rage, not for money, but simply to see if it can. In 1924, 2 wealthy University of Chicago students, Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, set out to commit what they believed would be the perfect crime. They were brilliant, charismatic, and born into privilege. Nathan Leopold was a child prodigy who spoke multiple languages and studied philosophy. He was especially obsessed with the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, a 19th-century German philosopher. Nietzsche's controversial idea of the Übermensch, or Superman, suggested that superior individuals could transcend conventional morality and create their own values. Leopold twisted this idea, believing he and Loeb were such supermen, above law, above empathy, and untouchable by consequence. Richard Loeb, equally intelligent but more impulsive, was obsessed with detective fiction and criminal psychology. He had everything and was bored. Together they decided that murder, real murder, would be their intellectual masterpiece, a thrill, a test of superiority. On May 21, 1924, they chose their victim, 14-year-old Bobby Franks, a distant relative of Loeb's. He trusted them when they offered him a ride home, but moments later, in the back seat of a rental car, they struck him in the head with a chisel and suffocated him with a rag. The killing was brutal, messier than they expected. They stripped his body, poured acid on his face to hinder identification, then dumped him in a drainage culvert near Wolf Lake. And yet, they called Bobby's family afterward, posing as kidnappers. They demanded a ransom, knowing he was already dead. But their perfect plan unraveled fast when Bobby's body was found the next day. Near the body, police found a pair of distinctive eyeglasses. Rare, expensive, and traceable. Only 3 pairs of that style had been sold in all of Chicago. One of them belonged to Nathan Leopold. Under pressure, both boys cracked. They confessed in graphic detail, not with regret but fascination. They described the murder as an experiment. Loeb called it a thing to do. Leopold, cold, calculating, admitted they killed for the thrill. The trial gripped the nation. How could 2 boys from privilege and education commit such a horror? Their defense attorney, Clarence Darrow, delivered a passionate 12-hour plea to save them from the death penalty. He argued they weren't evil, just damaged, arrogant, detached. The judge agreed, sentencing them to life in prison plus 99 years. 12 years later, in 1936, Richard Loeb was slashed to death in prison, stabbed over 50 times by a fellow inmate who claimed Loeb made unwanted advances. Newspapers mocked his death with headlines like, "Loeb slain by cellmate, he probably would have thrilled to the irony." Nathan Leopold lived. He served 33 years before being released on parole. He moved to Puerto Rico, where he lived quietly until his death in 1971. He never expressed remorse. The Leopold and Loeb case would go on to inspire countless studies, books, and even a chilling film by Alfred Hitchcock. Rope, released in 1948, was loosely based on their crime. It told the story of 2 young men who strangle a classmate just to see if they can get away with it, then hide the body in a trunk and host a dinner party around it. Cold, arrogant, detached from the horror they'd created, just like Leopold and Loeb. Nearly a century later, the case still unsettles us, not because of how the murder was done, but why. It wasn't about hate or desperation or revenge. It was a thrill kill. The act of 2 minds testing the limits of morality and finding nothing there. And in that empty space, they left behind something far more terrifying than blood. They left proof that sometimes evil doesn't need a reason. It just needs a chance. Our next story has become known as America's Dyatlov Pass, and with good reason. 5 men vanished into the mountains on a cold February night. Days later, their car was found on a mountain road with no reason to be there, and over the weeks that followed, their bodies turned up one by one, some frozen, some hidden, and one sheltered in a cabin with food he never touched. They weren't lost. That's what makes it so disturbing. The forest didn't kill them, something else did, and no one's ever figured out what. What happened in those woods remains one of the most chilling, unsolved cases in U.S. history. On a chilly February evening in 1978, 5 young men from Yuba City, California, Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Ted Wire, piled into a Mercury Montego to attend a college basketball game. Friends since childhood, they were described as gentle souls, some with mild intellectual disabilities, and others dealing with mental health challenges. They never returned home. Days later, the abandoned car was found in the Plumas National Forest, stuck in the snow on an unpaved mountain road. Strangely, it wasn't damaged. There were no signs of foul play. The area was remote and rugged, far from their planned route. Why had they driven 70 miles off course into the wilderness? Inside the car, investigators found maps, candy wrappers, and a neatly folded program from the game. But there was no sign of the 5 men. A massive search began, but weeks passed with no answers. The families were frantic. Then spring came, and with it a series of gruesome discoveries. Nearly 20 miles from the car, in a deserted U.S. Forest Service trailer, searchers found the emaciated body of Ted Weyer. He had been wrapped in sheets, lying on a mattress, and had seemingly survived for up to 13 weeks. The trailer was stocked with food and matches, yet none of it had been used. The window had been broken from the inside, suggesting desperation or panic. Ted's feet were badly frostbitten. His beard had grown thick. Someone had cared for him at some point, but who? Nearby, scattered in the snow and forest, were the skeletal remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling, partially eaten by animals. Jack Hewitt's body was found further into the woods, his bones scattered. Months later, bits of Gary Mathias's clothing and shoes were found, but his body was never recovered. To this day, his fate remains unknown. None of it made sense. Why did they abandon a working car? Why trek so deep into the forest in freezing temperatures? And why didn't Ted light a fire or eat the food in the trailer? Some theorized they were running from something or someone. Others suggested they'd been lured out there. Gary Mathias, a diagnosed schizophrenic, had previously gone missing before, but this time the others followed. Why? One particularly eerie theory involved a mysterious man at a gas station, seen arguing with the group before their disappearance. Another pointed to military installations in the area and possible experiments. But no solid evidence ever surfaced. The tragedy echoes the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia, another case of inexplicable deaths in the cold, with frightened victims seemingly fleeing an unseen threat. The Yuba County Five remains one of America's most baffling unsolved mysteries, a case filled with missing time, lost lives, and chilling silence. Some believe the forest still holds the answers. Others think those answers were buried with the snow and the dead. Whatever happened that night in the Sierra Nevada remains buried in frost and shadow, haunting anyone who dares look too closely. Hotels are meant to be temporary stops, but every so often one becomes a trap. Lights flicker in empty halls, doors open to nowhere, guests vanish without a trace, and sometimes the dead ride the elevator. Our next story takes us to downtown Los Angeles and the haunted halls of an infamous hotel, where mystery, tragedy, and the unexplained collide with an unsolved murder that still chills the internet to this day. Join me for the Cecil Hotel and the death of Elisa Lam. When 21-year-old Canadian student Elisa Lam checked into the infamous Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles in January of 2013, she likely didn't know she was walking into a building with a dark, violent history. The hotel, once home to serial killers like Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger, had long been known as a haven for the disturbed and destitute. But Elisa's disappearance and the bizarre circumstances surrounding it would turn the Cecil's reputation into legend. Elisa had been traveling alone on a solo West Coast trip, posting updates to her blog and social media, sharing quirky photos and musings. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, but managed her condition with medication. On January 31st, she failed to check out of the hotel. Her parents, who hadn't heard from her, alerted the authorities. The search began quietly, with police combing the hotel and surrounding area. Then, 19 days after she vanished, the hotel's guests began complaining of low water pressure and a foul taste in their tap water. Maintenance staff went to the rooftop to check the 4 large water tanks. There, floating naked and lifeless in one of the tanks, was Elisa Lam. Her clothes, similar to those seen in surveillance footage, were found nearby. The tank's lid was heavy and difficult to lift. The roof was restricted, with alarms and locked access points. No one could understand how Elisa had gotten there, or why. But what truly pushed the story into the realm of horror was the elevator footage released by LAPD. In the grainy black-and-white video, Elisa is seen entering the elevator alone. She appears confused, almost frightened. She presses multiple buttons, but the doors refuse to close. She peeks out into the hallway, jumps back, hides in the corner, then steps out, gesturing wildly, as if talking to someone unseen. Then she vanishes from view. The footage ends without resolution. Internet sleuths and true crime enthusiasts were captivated. Some believed she was being followed. Others suggested she was having a mental health episode. But even those explanations didn't account for the logistics of her death. How did she access the rooftop? Why didn't the water tank's lid stop her? Why was no alarm triggered? The autopsy ruled the death accidental, citing drowning. Her clothes weren't forcibly removed, and no alcohol or drugs were found in her system. There were no signs of trauma. And then came the stranger coincidences. Elisa Lam's case bore eerie similarities to the 2005 horror film Dark Water, where a girl is found dead in a building's rooftop tank after black water begins flowing from the faucets. Even more bizarre is a belief among conspiracy theorists that she was a victim of a TB study. This is due to a tuberculosis outbreak occurred in Skid Row near the Cecil Hotel around the time of her death. The testing kits used were named with the acronym Lam-Elisa. To this day, theories swirl. Was Elisa possessed, lured into a cult ritual, murdered and covered up? Or did her fragile mental health cause her to unknowingly seal her fate in one of the most inaccessible corners of the building? No one truly knows. But when night falls over Los Angeles and the wind howls through the alleys of Skid Row, the Cecil Hotel looms in silence, its windows watching. And some say, Elisa Lam still waits in the elevator, reaching for buttons that no longer work, trying to escape something we'll never see. Some hotels are built with bad bones, strange architecture, odd energy, stories whispered down hallways. Hotel Color, tucked away on the outskirts of Varna, Bulgaria, may be one of them. Our next story explores the strange and disturbing disappearance of a young man with his life before him. This is The Vanishing from Room 2805. It was never meant to be anything more than a cheap overnight stay for Lars Matank, a healthy, happy 28-year-old German tourist. He and his friends had been enjoying a beachside holiday, sun, drinks, soccer rivalries. Nothing unusual, until Lars got into a scuffle at a bar. He suffered a minor ear injury and a doctor advised him not to fly. His friends returned home. Lars checked into room 2805 at Hotel Color, alone. That's where everything started to unravel. He called his mother, whispering, terrified, told her to cancel his credit cards, said men were following him, that he was in danger. But when staff checked the security cameras, no one was there. Just Lars, pacing, peeking out from behind doors, eyes darting like something unseen was watching him. One night in that hotel, and he was never the same. Lars left the hotel at sunrise and took a cab to Varna Airport. At the airport medical office, he calmly asked about flying again. Then something snapped. In an instant, he leapt to his feet and sprinted from the airport, leaving all his belongings behind. Passport, phone, wallet. Surveillance footage shows him running full speed across the terminal, through a parking lot, and into a nearby field. He disappeared into the woods, vanished. He hasn't been seen since. No one knows what happened in that room. Some believe his mind fractured from untreated head trauma. Others think the antibiotics he was given triggered a rare neurological episode. But then there are the darker whispers. Hotel staff later reported that room 2805 had a long history of strange events. Guests complaining of strange voices at night, flickering lights, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. One cleaner refused to enter alone, saying the air was wrong. Internet sleuths have pointed to the hotel's murky past, rumors of mob activity, underground clinics, and even human trafficking. But the most chilling theory? That Lars saw something in that room. Something no one else could see. A haunting presence that didn't want him to leave, and maybe didn't let him. Today, room 2805 remains locked, not due to renovations, but because no guest has stayed there since. And if you ask the staff about Lars Mittank, they'll go quiet. Some won't speak of him at all. They say the hotel's silence is louder at night. That if you walk the halls alone, you might hear footsteps that aren't yours, or see a man's shadow in the reflection of a room that's supposed to be empty. Hotel color still stands. Room 2805 is still there, and Lars, he's still missing. Or maybe he never really left. They say madness runs in the blood. But what if it creeps in, all at once? What if your mother, your father, your siblings all snapped overnight and dragged you into the darkness with them? No violence, no warning, just a slow unraveling, paranoia, fear, and the need to run from something no one else can see. Our last story is about madness that took a family without warning. This is the disappearance of the Tromp family. They lived in a quiet house on a quiet street, nestled in the rolling farmlands of Victoria, Australia. The Tromps weren't the kind of family that made headlines. Hardworking, private, normal. Mark and Jacoba Tromp ran a successful berry farm. Their adult children, Rihanna, Mitchell, and Ella, still lived with them. No signs of dysfunction, no financial stress, no history of mental illness. They were the kind of family you wouldn't look at twice, until they vanished. It was Monday, August 29th, 2016, when the Tromps climbed into their silver Peugeot SUV and drove away from everything. Phones, passports, credit cards, all left behind. No goodbye, no plan, just gone. Whatever they thought was chasing them, they wanted no digital trail. It started as a family road trip, 5 people in one car heading north toward New South Wales. But it wasn't a vacation, and it wasn't long before things started to unravel. By the second day, Mitchell, the middle child and only son, had had enough. Tired of the silence, the paranoia, the whispered suspicions from his father, he got out of the car and went home. That was the first fracture. Later that day, the remaining 4 continued on, but not for long. The next to split was Ella. Without warning, she took the car and drove to Melbourne, alone. She reported her parents missing to the police. That's when the story started to reach the public, but it was only just beginning. On Wednesday, Rihanna and Jacoba, still gripped by whatever fear had seized the family, somehow ended up in Goulburn, disoriented, paranoid, and confused. They boarded a truck, hoping to escape whatever was following them. But when the driver pulled over to use the bathroom, Rihanna bolted. She was later found by police hiding in the back of another stranger's utility truck. She wouldn't or couldn't explain why. Jacoba was hospitalized soon after, incoherent and terrified. She was diagnosed with what doctors called a rare case of shared delusional disorder. But where was Mark? The father, the one who seemed to be at the center of it all, had disappeared. For 2 more days he wandered alone through the Yarra Ranges. He was finally found on Saturday, 5 days after the family vanished. Dirty, disoriented, clutching a small stack of papers. No one knows what was written on them. He refused to speak to reporters. He wouldn't answer police questions. He just shut down. Each member of the Tromp family eventually returned to their lives. No charges were filed. No formal explanation was given. When questioned later, Mitchell, the most grounded of the group, said his father had been acting strange, convinced people were out to get them, talking in circles, saying the phones were bugged, that they had to leave before it happened. But it was never named. Some say it was a psychological break, a case of folie à famille, a rare shared delusional disorder passed from one mind to the next like an infection. Others point to more paranoid theories, cult influence, government surveillance, something buried on their land. But there was no trauma, no triggers, no drugs in their system, just a family, together one day, scattered and broken the next. And in the silence that followed, only questions. What pushed the Tromps to run? What did they see? What were they running from? Maybe some doors once opened don't close again. Maybe fear doesn't always need a reason. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't imagining it at all. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Whispers After Dark, Disturbing Stories to Sleep By. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, comment below. Tell us about a story you would like to hear, and check out the other chilling videos in our channel. Make sure to subscribe, like, and tap the notification bell so you never miss what waits in the shadows. Until then, stay curious, stay cautious, and beware of the whispers after dark.